sales were down this week, and they were inconsistent day to day. Our listing activity slowed down as well. And if I stop the conversation right there, that would probably sound like a bad week for the business. But actually, I don't think it was. Because while the sales chart looks soft, the business itself may have actually gotten better. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of card sellers make. Maybe all of us make it at some point. We look at the short-term numbers, we don't like what we see, and we assume the business is going backwards. But sometimes that is not what's happening at all. Sometimes the business is just getting cleaner, more organized, and better positioned before the numbers catch up enough to make you feel good about it. So in this episode, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how to tell the difference between a genuinely bad week and a productive week that just doesn't look impressive on the surface. Welcome to my so-called card life, an inside look at the life of a low-end card reseller, brought to you by JC3 Cards and Collectibles, a premier reseller of trading cards available today on eBay, Collects, and whatnot. Whether you're looking to fill out that new set or just rekindle memories with one of your favorite players from your favorite teams, let JC3 Cards and Collectibles help you find that card you're looking for and provide fast, secure delivery straight to your door. Welcome to my so-called card life, the podcast where we talk about what actually happens when you try to run a real card business, the decisions, adjustments, and lessons that don't show up in highlight reels. And this week was a good example of that. Because if I just looked at the headline is simple. Sales were down overall and very inconsistent. Listing activity also slowed down for the week. And that's enough to make most sellers feel like the week got away from them. But when I look a little bit closer, the picture is much more complicated than that. There was actually some growth in multi-card orders with our recent coupon launch. Operational issues were minimal this week. I spent more time this week on support processes and operational improvement. Things like business cards and inventory cleanup and backstock sorting, planning ahead for the national, and general cleanup work that doesn't feel flashy at all, but absolutely matters. And on top of that, I nearly finished listing all of my pickups from the recent GOAT card show. And better yet, a large percentage of those cards have already sold. So this episode is not really about trying to talk myself into feeling better about a weak sales chart. It's about learning how to read the week correctly. Because not every quiet week is a bad week. And not every busy week is actually productive. A lot of sellers, and I'd have to include myself in this from time to time, judge the health of the entire business by a very small handful of visible signals. Usually, it's something like this: how much sold? How many listings went live? Did I get enough activity to feel like I made progress? And the problem is, those signals are real, but they're also incomplete. If sales are down and listing slows, it's easy to default to, well, this was a bad week. And maybe it was. Sometimes it is that simple, but not always. Because a business is not just its visible output, a business is also its structure, its organization, its process quality, its readiness, friction level, its ability to support growth without turning every week into chaos. And those things do not always show up immediately in the sales total. And that's the trap. We trust the scoreboard because it's easy to read. But easy to read is not the same as complete. If you had a week where sales were light, but your inventory got cleaner, your support process got better, and your event prep got tighter, and your backstock got organized, and fresh inventory got listed and started moving, did you really have a bad week? Maybe not. You may have had a week where the business improved in ways that the dashboard can't summarize very well. And that is a very different conversation. So let me ground this in my actual week, because otherwise this turns into kind of a generic business self-help talk, and that's not really the point here. This week, sales were down overall, and they were also inconsistent. Some days looked decent enough, but other days felt very light. It didn't have that smooth, steady feel that you want to have when you're trying to judge momentum. Listing also slowed down. Now, in a pure output mindset, that combination feels bad almost immediately. Lower sales plus slower listing equals trouble. That's the equation most of us run in our heads. But it's important to remember that it's not the whole picture. One thing I did see was growth in multi-card orders. Not enough to say the whole week was suddenly amazing, but enough to notice that buyer behavior may be improving in at least one important area. Operationally, the week was pretty quiet. Really minimal issues. No major fires, no pileup of avoidable problems. And that matters. A week with fewer disruptions has value, especially if you're trying to build something that you can scale without constantly tripping over itself. And a big part of the week went into work that does not feel productive in the same way that listing does. Creating new business cards and getting those ordered. Cleaning up your inventory. Going through your backstock. Planning for the national at the end of July. And general support and process work. That kind of work is almost always dangerous from a psychological standpoint because it feels like you're spending time around the business instead of in the business. It can make you feel like you're stalled out. But in reality, a lot of that work is exactly what keeps the business from getting sloppier, heavier, and harder to run. And then, probably the strongest point of this week, I nearly completed listing all the pickups from the Goat Card Show. And a large percentage of those have already sold. That's not a trivial point. That says fresh inventory still matters. And it says new buys can quickly convert. It also says operations did not just drift all week, it actually turned show pickups into live listings and then into sales. So, again, was this a huge, flashy revenue week? No, it wasn't. Was it automatically a bad business week? Also, no, it wasn't. I think slow weeks get misread because sales create emotional clarity. A sale is very easy to understand. It feels good immediately. And it tells you, at least in that moment, that something worked. Backend work doesn't do that same thing. No one gets that same emotional rush from organizing backstock that they get from hearing that cha-ching sound. Nobody looks at cleaned up inventory area and thinks, wow, I'm absolutely on fire right now. And that's part of the problem. Sales give immediate validation. Operational work gives delayed value. And it's human nature, especially in a business that already has a lot of emotion and volatility baked into it, that tends to overweight immediate validation. So you get this distorted kind of reading of the week. A messy week with sales can still feel successful. A disciplined week with low sales can misleadingly feel unproductive. But those are emotional reactions and not necessarily accurate business evaluations. A sloppy operation can still produce sales for a while. A cluttered inventory system can still function for a little while. A business with poor support habits can also still get by for a while. But the cost shows up later. The friction accumulates, the delays accumulate, the wasted time accumulates, and so does the poor decisions. And then eventually, sellers will act shocked when the whole thing starts feeling heavier than it should. And that's why I think it's important to slow down and ask, what kind of week was this really? It's not, did it feel exciting? And it's not, did the dashboard flatter me? But did the business get healthier or did it get weaker? Because those are much better questions. This is where I think a lot of real businesses get built or broken, and that's in the invisible work. The stuff that's absolutely necessary, but also not very glamorous. Inventory cleanup, invisible work. Backstock sorting, invisible work. Process improvement, you guessed it, invisible work. Planning ahead for a major event like the National. Invisible work. Cleaning up support systems. Also invisible work. And it's really easy to disrespect that kind of work because it doesn't produce instant public evidence. There's no big screenshot, no dramatic sales spike, and no obvious before and after revenue graph where everybody claps. But when you neglect invisible work long enough, eventually the business is going to tell on you. You can't find things fast enough, your listing flow gets slower, your shipping prep gets clunkier. Decisions get worse because your inventory is harder to read, backlog becomes heavier than it should be, and that next event sneaks up on you. The whole business starts to feel more reactive than intentional. And that's what invisible work protects you from. Infrastructure is boring until you don't have it. Organization is boring until disorganization starts costing you real time and real money. Support processes are boring until one weak point keeps creating the same problem over and over. That's why I don't want to frame this week as, well, sales were weak, so I did some cleanup to stay busy. That's not the right way to frame this week up. The better framing is this week included work that strengthens the operation, even if that work doesn't show up immediately in the top line sales number. It's real business activity. It's not filler work. That is not procrastination by default. It can be avoidance if you use it to hide from listing or hide from selling. Sure, that could be. But done for the right reason, it's a part of the business. Here in the Midwest, this rings true with a lot of people. Sometimes you're harvesting, sometimes you're clearing the field, and both matter. One of the more useful things from this week was seeing some growth in multi-card orders driven by our coupon. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm not trying to oversell that point and act like everything is suddenly solved because a coupon did something useful. That would be lazy analysis. But I do think it matters because not all progress shows up first in your gross sales. Sometimes progress shows up in buyer behavior. A buyer adding one card is one kind of signal. A buyer adding multiple cards is a different kind of signal. That tells you something about how people are interacting with your inventory. It tells you something about whether the structure of the store is encouraging better cart building. And it tells you something about order composition, not just raw order count. And if you're trying to build a better operation, order composition matters. Multi-card orders can mean better use of shipping. They can mean better engagement with your store. And they can mean stronger merchandising flow. They can also mean your inventory is connecting across listings better than it was before. And again, that may not fully transform the week on its own. But these are the kinds of signals that matter when you're trying to decide whether the business is learning. If it's learning anything from the experiments you're running with it. Sometimes the top line number stays a little flat while the underlying mechanics improve first. And that is very important. Because if the mechanics improve first, the sales result may lag behind a little bit. And if you're too emotional, you can miss that and kill something before it's had enough time to teach you anything. The other thing this week made pretty clear is that fresh inventory still matters. I nearly completed listing all of the pickups from the GOAT card show, and a sizable percentage of those have already sold. That doesn't mean every card show buy is brilliant, and it doesn't mean fresh inventory automatically fixes everything. And it definitely doesn't mean older inventory doesn't matter. But it does reinforce something important. The market still reacts to relevant, newly listed inventory. And that matters for a couple of reasons. First, it tells me the business is not just dead in the water because one week looks uneven. If fresh material is moving, there's still demand to capture. Second, it highlights something I think a lot of sellers ignore when they're trying to interpret a slow period. Not all inventory is equally alive. Some inventory is fresh, while some inventory is stale. Some inventory is mispriced, and some inventory is overlisted. And there's some inventory that should have probably been grouped, discounted, and moved out a long time ago. So when sales feel soft, the answer is not always the market's bad. Sometimes the answer is the wrong inventory is sitting in the wrong place for too long. And fresh show pickups selling quickly is a reminder that inventory quality, timing, and relevance still matter. And that's a healthier takeaway than just staring at a weekly sales chart and panicking. We've mentioned this before, but I think it bears repeating. Because I think it's one of the hardest lessons in small reselling businesses. Busy is not the same as productive. You can spend a full week doing things and still not meaningfully improve the operation. You can be constantly in motion and still avoid the work that matters most. And you can chase activity simply because activity feels safer than clarity. And the opposite is true as well. You can have a week that feels quieter. Maybe you had fewer listings that went up. And maybe the sales chart didn't flatter you at all. And maybe there were fewer moments that gave you that little hit of momentum. But if that week reduced friction, improved organization, strengthened support processes, moved fresh inventory, and gave you useful signals about buyer behavior, then that week may have been more productive then a noisier week that just happened to generate more immediate validation. And this is where I think sellers get themselves in trouble. They start managing the business for emotional reassurance instead of operational clarity. They want proof right now. They want motion right now. And they want sales right now. And of course they do. That's perfectly normal. But if you only trust the parts of the business that make you feel productive immediately, you're going to underrate the work that gives the business durability. And durability matters because the goal is not just to survive one more week of selling cards. The goal should be to build something you can keep running without every week turning into a fragile juggling act. So, if I'm trying to learn from this week, honestly, I think the takeaway is that I need a better standard for judging whether a week was good or bad. Not just what did gross sales say. To be sure, that matters. I'm not dismissing revenue. Revenue is not fake. Sales do matter. But I think the weekly review has to be wider than that. A better set of questions might be something like, did sales happen? What kind of orders came in? Did fresh inventory move? Did the business get cleaner or messier? Did operational friction go up or down? Did support work get handled before it became a problem? Did I improve the readiness for the next thing on the calendar? And did I make the business easier to run next week than it was this week? Those are really better business questions. Because if the answers to those questions are moving in the right direction, then a soft week may still be a useful week. And if the answers to those questions are getting worse, then a strong sales week might actually be hiding a deeper problem. And that's really the point of this episode. Not every slow week is a warning sign. And not every good week really looks so good. And not every impressive looking week is actually healthy. If I had to boil this week down into one sentence, it would be this. Sometimes the business gets better before the sales chart makes you feel better. It doesn't mean you ignore weak sales. And it doesn't mean you make excuses forever. It doesn't mean every low energy week deserves a gold star just because you cleaned a shelf and sorted some boxes. It means you need to read the week accurately. This week, sales were soft and inconsistent. That is absolutely true. But it's not the whole truth. The business also saw some encouraging signs in multi card behavior. Operational issues were minimal. A lot of overdue support work and organization got attention. Planning for the national moved forward. And Goat Card Show inventory got listed and sold. It's not nothing, and it's not a dead week. And it's not a business collapsing. That is a week where the surface looked quieter than the underlying progress. And if you're trying to build something real, you need to learn how to respect that difference. So that's the question I want to leave you with this week, folks. How do you decide whether a week was actually productive? Do you only trust the sales total? Do you only trust listing count? Or do you also count cleanup, systems, support work, inventory positioning, and better buyer behavior as real progress? Because I think a lot of us are too quick to dismiss the weeks that don't feel exciting, even when those are the weeks doing some of the most important work under the surface. And if you're trying to build a real card business, not just chase the feeling of progress, that difference matters. If this episode hit home for you, let us know in the comments. Have you had a week where sales felt slow, but the business actually got better? We'd love to hear from you. That's it for this episode, my friends. I hope you too keep building your own so-called card life.